So, let's get right into it. What if I told you that the system we're all living in isn't really capitalism anymore? That's the pretty radical idea coming from economist and former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. He argues we've stumbled into a brand new era, one that's quietly making countries like Australia and most of Europe, well, increasingly irrelevant. To really get what he's talking about, we're going to go on a bit of a journey through the last 80 years. We'll start with his pretty stark diagnosis for the world today, then we'll rewind the clock to see how capitalism has changed. After that, we'll look at this new kind of power he calls cloud capital, see how it's secretly fueling the US-China conflict, and finally, check out his proposed way out of this whole mess. All right, so first up, let's tackle the central problem. Varoufakis kicks things off with a pretty serious warning for what you might call Western-aligned middle powers, saying they're all facing the same big, scary predicament. And there it is. That's the hook for his entire argument, a creeping irrelevance. I mean, that's a provocative thing to say, right? He's suggesting that these major nations are basically losing their grip on the world stage. So the big question is, why? Why does he think this is happening? Well, he points to two things that are happening right now. First, a chronic, decades-long failure to actually invest in the stuff that matters. And second, he says they've slid from being a strategic ally of the United States to having a self-defeating subservience to whatever Washington wants. But to really understand why that's so important, we actually need to go back in time. So let's jump into the history that got us here. Varoufakis argues that you can basically split the last 80 years of capitalism into three totally distinct phases, and each one has shaped where we are today. First, you had what some people call the golden age of Bretton Woods, which ran from the end of World War II all the way up to 1971. Then, the system completely flipped on its head with neoliberal globalization, which lasted right up until the 2008 financial crash. And that crash, he says, is what gave birth to the strange new world we're in now, the age of technofeudalism. Each of these systems ran on a completely different economic engine. So in that first era, America was basically the world's creditor. It ran a massive trade surplus, acting kind of like a giant vacuum cleaner. It would send dollars out to help rebuild Europe and Japan, and then those dollars would get sucked right back to the US to buy American-made goods. It worked pretty well, leading to a lot of growth and relatively low in quality. But then, after 1971, the whole thing flipped. America started running a trade deficit. So now, that deficit acted like a different kind of vacuum cleaner. This one hoovered up exports from places like Germany, Japan, and eventually China. And what happened to all the profits those countries made? They sent them right back to Wall Street. This is what fueled massive financialization, huge inequality, and, you guessed it, the 2008 crash. You see, the 2008 crisis didn't just smash the old system to pieces. It actually created a new one from the rubble. And this is where Varoufakis introduces his most important idea, a new, mutated form of capital that has completely changed the rules of the game. He has a name for it. Cloud capital. And no, it's not a factory or a machine in the traditional sense. It's the algorithm on Amazon that somehow knows what you want to buy before you do. It's the TikTok feed that literally shapes what you want. It's a super powerful tool for modifying our behavior that lives right in our pockets. So how does this whole ecosystem actually work? Well, first, it grabs our attention. Then it uses our data to create desires we didn't even know we had. From there, it sells stuff directly to us. But it's not just about us as consumers. It also drives and monitors workers. And, get this, it even gets us to do free labor for it, with every single like, click, and post we make. And finally, it closes the loop by connecting seamlessly with our digital wallets. It's a complete, self-contained cycle of control. Okay, but where did the money to build this enormous new thing come from? Well, after the 2008 crash, the big central banks printed a truly mind-boggling amount of money, $35 trillion. But instead of going into regular old industries, a huge chunk of that super cheap money got funneled directly into these new tech giants. It was the rocket fuel for the rise of cloud capital. And the result of all that money is, well, it's staggering. Just look at this. The market value of only 7 American tech firms, the Magnificent Seven, is now worth more than the entire stock markets of the UK, France, Japan, Canada, and China combined. That is just an insane concentration of power, and it's almost all located in just 2 places, the US and China. And that right there brings us to the most controversial part of his whole argument. He says this massive concentration of cloud capital is the real reason we're in a new Cold War between the United States and China. So here's the key point. When we hear about the US and China, the news is usually about Taiwan or military tensions. But Varoufakis says that's mostly distraction. The real fight, he argues, is a life or death battle for control over the global payment system, the basic plumbing of the entire world economy. He uses these amazing metaphors to describe it. He says America's power rests on this rickety dollar highway. It's old, it's got potholes, but it's still a monopoly. Meanwhile, China has gone and built an all-singing, all-dancing payment superhighway. It's technologically way ahead, and it poses a clear and present danger to that dollar monopoly that American power has relied on for decades. So, if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? Varoufakis actually lays out a pretty detailed path forward. He uses a middle power like Australia as his main example for how other countries might be able to escape this so-called creeping irrelevance. At home, he says it's time for a complete overhaul. First, ditch the old economic model of just digging stuff out of the ground and selling houses to each other. Instead, launch a huge Green New Deal centered on solar power. And to pay for it all, he says, properly tax unearned income to fund things like free education and building new social housing to keep inflation down. And on the world stage, the message is all about independence. He urges countries like Australia to rebuild their reputations by ending what he calls blind subservience to the US. He says they should actively work to de-escalate the new Cold War and engage with China peacefully. The whole point is to become a respected friend who can actually say no, not just a follower. And when you put all of this together, it brings us to one final, really big question. If Varoufakis is right, and our world has been totally transformed under our noses, then we're all trying to navigate a very new and very uncertain landscape. What his entire analysis really does is challenge our most basic assumptions. It suggests that the old map of capitalism we've been using for 100 years is now totally obsolete. So the question he leaves us with is a really profound one. If we're now living in a world dominated by cloud capital and a clash of these new technofeudal empires, isn't it time we drew a new map to figure out where we're going?